What if I told you that sometimes the greatest threat to my promises does not come from enemies, but from fear? Fear has caused kings to fall, nations to crumble, and even faithful believers to make decisions they later regret. Yet Genesis chapter 20 reveals something extraordinary. Even when human faith falters, my faithfulness remains. Even when people make mistakes, my purposes continue moving forward. And before this chapter ends, a king will receive a terrifying warning in the middle of the night. A prophet will confront his own weakness, and my covenant promise will be protected by my hand alone. The destruction of Sodom was over. The smoke had faded. The judgment had passed. And Abraham continued his journey through the southern region, settling for a time in Gerar. Yet despite everything he had experienced, the visions, the covenant, the promises, the miraculous encounters, an old fear resurfaced. A familiar weakness returned. Abraham looked at Sarah and remembered a strategy he had used before. Tell them you are my sister. Years earlier in Egypt, fear had driven him to make the same decision. Now history seemed to repeat itself. Pause for a moment. How often do people imagine that spiritual growth removes every weakness instantly? Yet even faithful people sometimes struggle with old fears, old habits, old failures. Abraham was a man of extraordinary faith, but he was still human, and fear once again influenced his judgment. When King Abimelech of Gerar learned about Sarah, he took her into his household. At first glance, the situation appeared dangerous. After all, Sarah was not just Abraham's wife. She was the woman through whom the covenant son would soon be born. The promise was closer than ever. Isaac's birth was approaching. The covenant was about to enter its next stage, and now Sarah had been taken into another king's house. To human eyes, the situation may have seemed alarming, but what appears impossible for humanity is never beyond my control. That very night I intervened, not through armies, not through prophets, not through visible signs. I entered Abimelech's dream. Imagine the king suddenly awakening to a divine warning. The message was direct, severe, impossible to ignore. You are a dead man, for the woman you have taken is another man's wife. Notice something important. Abimelech had acted without knowing the truth. He had not touched Sarah. His intentions had not been malicious, and he immediately pleaded his case. Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did not Abraham himself tell me she was his sister? Did she not confirm the same story? Everything I did was done with integrity, and I acknowledged his innocence. I knew his heart. I knew his intentions. In fact, I revealed something remarkable. I had personally prevented him from sinning. Think about that. There are moments when my protection works in ways people never see. Doors close unexpectedly. Plans fail mysteriously. Circumstances change suddenly. And only later do people realize I was protecting them from something they could not see. Abimelech had been restrained by my hand, not because of his power, not because of his wisdom, but because my covenant was at stake. Then I gave him a clear instruction. Return Sarah to Abraham, for Abraham is a prophet, and he will pray for you. Otherwise, judgment will come upon your household. The next morning, Abimelech wasted no time. Fear spread throughout his palace. His servants were informed. His household understood the seriousness of the situation, and immediately he summoned Abraham. Imagine the conversation. The king looked at the prophet, not with admiration, but with confusion, and perhaps disappointment. What have you done to us? Why would you bring such danger upon my kingdom? Why would you deceive us?" The questions were fair. The king, who had acted honestly, now found himself correcting the man of faith. This is one of the most humbling moments in Abraham's story, because Scripture does not hide the weaknesses of its heroes. The Bible does not portray faithful people as flawless. It portrays them honestly, their victories, their failures, their strengths, their struggles. Abraham explained his reasoning. He feared for his life. He assumed there was no fear of God in the land. He believed people might kill him to take Sarah, and technically, Sarah was his half-sister. But partial truths can still create serious consequences. Fear had distorted Abraham's judgment. Fear had caused him to rely upon human strategy rather than divine protection. Yet, despite Abraham's mistake, my promise remained secure. Abimelech responded generously. He returned Sarah immediately. He provided livestock, servants, silver, and access to his land. The king, who had nearly become part of a disaster, instead became a source of blessing. Then he addressed Sarah directly, publicly affirming her honor, publicly clearing her reputation, publicly demonstrating that she remained untouched. Why? Because the covenant promise had to remain beyond question. The birth of Isaac was approaching, and I was ensuring that every detail unfolded according to my plan. Then comes one of the most beautiful ironies in the chapter. The same Abraham who had caused the crisis was now called to pray for the king. Think about that. Many people would expect judgment, condemnation, punishment. Instead, grace appeared. Abraham prayed, and I healed Abimelech, his wife, his household. Their ability to bear children was restored. Life returned. Blessing returned. Healing returned. This reveals an important truth about my character. I do not merely correct, I restore. I do not merely expose mistakes, I redeem them. I do not merely reveal weakness, I continue working through imperfect people. The chapter closes by revealing that I had closed the wombs of Abimelech's household because of Sarah, not as cruelty, but as protection. The covenant line had to remain untouched. The promised child had to come exactly as I had declared, and nothing would interfere with my purpose. Not kings, not fear, not mistakes, not circumstances, nothing. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of Genesis chapter 20. Human faith may stumble, but my faithfulness never does. Abraham was afraid, yet my promise remained secure. Abraham made a mistake, yet my covenant continued forward. Abraham relied upon his own strategy, yet my protection never failed. Many people fear that their weaknesses will destroy my plans for their lives. Genesis chapter 20 reminds us otherwise. While actions have consequences, my purposes are not dependent upon human perfection. I am able to protect what I have promised. I am able to complete what I have begun, and I remain faithful even when people struggle. The story of Abraham is not the story of a perfect man. It is the story of a faithful God, a God who guides imperfect people toward extraordinary destinies, a God who protects his promises, a God who remains sovereign over every circumstance. And the greatest fulfillment of all is now only one chapter away. If this story has deepened your understanding of Scripture, subscribe to Primordial Lore and continue exploring the greatest stories ever told. And now, continue to the next chapter, where decades of waiting finally come to an end. Laughter fills Abraham's household, and the miraculous child of promise is born.